it took forever. One customer kindly told us that our problem was that the air conditioning people can't fix it. It has to be a sheet metal person. Are we ready? All right. So, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to welcome Douglas Preston back to the Poison Pen. I will say that Doug and I have been together for his every book, starting with Cities of Gold and moving up to today.
Yeah, that was in, that was 1990?
Something like that. We're
Yeah.
both older.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that was 3 bookstores ago for you, wasn't it?
This is the third one.
third,
You're
yeah.
you're right. So the store opened. I opened the store in 1989 in October, and we moved here in 1999. So you've been through. I used to describe the old store was over on Main Street at Marshall Way, and people would say, "How do we find it?" And I said, "We're at the horse's ass." Because of the statue, that's there. But I know, but we've had a wonderful run, haven't we?
Well, it's true, and Barbara has been such a supporter of mine and hundreds of authors. I mean, no bookstore owner really has supported authors like Barbara. It's amazing. I mean, she's supported me for years when I was a completely unknown writer, struggling, had no money, and I would go to book signings. And, the bookstores all try hard, but sometimes nobody would show up, or very few people. I remember one book signing, the only person who showed up was Lincoln's mom. And but Barbara always brought people in because people like you all knew that when she had an author that they were going to be interesting and worth listening to, even if they'd never heard of him. So I'm very grateful. And also Barbara's given me excellent advice on my writing career over the years. Very important advice that I think has really contributed to me being I know has contributed to me being being a successful author.
You could even say you're a #1 bestseller without lying.
Well, and I would not, this is true, I would never have been a #1 bestseller if it wasn't for Barbara.
That's very true, because we figured out. Thank you. Some years ago, we figured out how we could do events with Lincoln and Doug, even though Lincoln does not leave home. But he doesn't. So, that's how it goes. But anyway, I brought all that up to say that the Monster of Florence, you were here in, was it 26? I'm trying to remember how long ago it was.
2007, I think.
Right. And
Yeah.
at that time, Doug had been in Italy for 4 years and with his family, and had gotten interested in this horrendous serial killer that was operating around Florence. And I'll let him tell you the story. But the reason it's kind of come back into prominence is your bad luck with movies, right?
Yeah, really bad luck. I have to ask a question. How many people here have seen The Monster of Florence on Netflix? All right. Now, if you liked it, could you raise your hand again? Okay. If you didn't like it, can you raise your hand? Okay. Interesting. I haven't seen it, so I can't say if I like it or don't like it. But I can tell you how it came about, and it's kind of a sad story. When quite some time ago, my agent in Hollywood sold the rights to Studio Canal to the Monster of Florence, which is a production company and a studio, and they then took the project out to all the streaming services and had an auction, and a lot of streaming services participated. Netflix, Apple, AMC, Hulu, all were bidding on this project. And Apple won, although Netflix came very close, but they didn't quite pay enough money. I had nothing to do with this. This was the studio reselling this thing. Well, so Apple started making the series, and Netflix decided to make it anyway and to steal my book. Now, you may ask, how can they do that? It's perfectly legal because it's a nonfiction book, it's a true story, and you can't copyright non-fictional information. It's factual information, you can't copyright it. They can't put me in their story because I own my own life story rights, and they can't put Mario Spezi in there, my co-author, because he owns his life story rights. But they've made, so the first series has come out. The director is an Italian named Solima, who is, well, I guess we're being filmed. So I'm not going to say what he is. But he went to now Mario Spezi unfortunately died, passed away, and he has a widow who's 80 years old, and he went to her, and I guess the word is bullied, but in the charming Italian way, trying to get her to give up Mario's life story rights to him so he could put it in his show. She said no. And they've since approached me, and I've said no. But, so that's where we're at. But I don't know if the Monster of Florence series is any good or not. I mean, it might be good, it might not be good. It was a #1 Netflix series for a while, so it can't be bad. But if you want to know the true story, it's in my book, the book that Mario and I wrote. That's the true story. It's not a Hollywood version. Every fact, this book is factual. It's in the 20 years since it's been published, not one fact in this book has been challenged. This is a true story, even though when you read it, you can hardly believe what you're reading because it is so crazy,
Right. Well, the prosecutor was the same one who prosecuted Amanda Knox, right?
That's right. In fact, that's a strange story. I was driving my car, and I got a call on my cell phone, and I answered it, which I shouldn't have done, but anyway, I answered it. And there was someone on the other end of the line who was crying hysterically and couldn't speak. So I pulled off to the side of the road. I was really frightened by this. And she was saying my name, but she couldn't speak. And finally, it came out. She said, "I'm Amanda Knox's mother. And my daughter has been arrested in Italy for murder, and she's innocent, and they're framing her. And that this prosecutor, and I want you to help me, and we need help." So I got involved in that case. And it is absolutely true that Amanda Knox was completely framed. And the reason she was framed is quite interesting, and I talk about it in my book, The Monster of Florence, in the paperback version, because it's the same prosecutor, Mignini, who prosecuted me, brought me in for an interrogation, had Mario arrested as being the Monster of Florence himself. The same crazy prosecutor was the one who prosecuted Amanda Knox. And the two cases are deeply linked, the monster case and her murder trial. So
Doug has a slideshow to show you, but I will also tell you that one of the tragedies involved in all this was that George Clooney was originally cast by Apple to play Doug. I know. Now, try to envision George Clooney playing Doug. I can easily. Yeah. So we've lost George in this transition.
It's funny. Oh, again, there's that darn camera. But I remember my wife said, "Oh, George Clooney's going to play Doug, my husband. Is there going to be an actress playing me? And are they going to have sex?" I was like, "Shut up! Stop that! Be quiet! What are you saying? This is horrible."
Anyway, we now have the paperback version, which has got some updates in it. So that was what Doug wants to talk about and has a slideshow. But before we do that, I will just mention that Doug, and he's working on a true crime story that won't come out until next year, but it takes place here in Arizona. And anything you may know about the Pleasant Valley murders and the whole thing that went on there is a book that Doug is writing, but we won't get it until the fall of 27.
Right. Has anyone heard of the Pleasant Valley War? Raise your hand. Yeah,
well, you're going to be really surprised when you read about it. It's a tremendous.
It's one of the most interesting episodes in Arizona history, and it was quite famous when it occurred. It was nationally known. It was written up all over in the New York Times, everything, and it's now been forgotten. And it is the most incredible story. It's unbelievable.
So, Doug, being a true crime guy, it was the editor of a book that came out this fall called Best True Crime Stories of the Year 2025. So we do have copies of that you can take away from the bookstore today if you wish. And we have The Monster of Florence. And I do have, and we'll figure out a way to do it, I have a couple of advanced reading copies of Pendergast, and I can give those away. So, I'm trying to think. Did we give out numbers? Does anybody? We did. All right. So what we usually do is we have Doug pick a couple of numbers from the total number, and I can give away a copy each of. I have two of Pendergast, so it won't be completely right. All right.
All
So,
right.
Patrick, are you going to show the slideshow?
I've got it here, and I think I can do it.
Okay. We're
So
just going to turn the lights off.
so I just thought I'd. All right, let me move this. Yeah. Does it look good? So in the year 2000, I moved to Florence, Italy, with my family, my wife and our two little kids, 5 and 6, and I had an idea to write a murder mystery set in Florence about an art historian who's found murdered, and his eyes are gouged out. He's found by the side of the road murdered with his eyes gouged out. And but I had to do some research to find out what happens in Italy when they find a dead body, a murdered person. How is the investigation done? And so I started asking around, and someone said, you've got to talk to Mario Spezi. He is the crime correspondent for La Nazione, which is the local Florence newspaper. He knows more about the police than even the police. And so I called him up. He didn't speak any English, and my Italian was very poor. But we met in a cafe near where we both lived in Florence. And he told me all about what would happen when a body's found, and how the carabinieri and the polizia get in arguments about who's going to be in charge of the case, and often argue about who gets the body. And, it was really fun. And then when all that was over, I said, well, what are some of the interesting cases you've worked on? And he said, well, I've worked on the Monster of Florence. Of course, you've heard of it. And I said, no, I've never heard of the Monster of Florence. And actually, when I got back that evening to my house, this is the year 2000, I Googled the Monster of Florence and only got 2 hits in English. 2 hits. Now, if you Google the Monster of Florence, you will get 2 million hits. But I realized, my God, this story is not known in English at all. I mean, Il Mostro di Firenze, if you Google that in Italian, you get millions of hits. But anyway. So he told me the story, and I was so floored. I had never heard a story like this in my life. It is the most extraordinary true crime story. I mean, it makes Jack the Ripper look like, Mr. Rogers. I mean, this was so horrifying and such a complex and bizarre story. It's the longest running investigation in modern Italian history. Over 100,000 men have been investigated for these serial killings. What it was a group of, it was a series of murders that took place between 1974 and 1985 in the beautiful hills around Florence, where couples making love in parked cars were preyed upon by this serial killer who would shoot both of them, kill them both, and then take the woman's body out of the car and away and mutilate it in a really bizarre ritualistic fashion. And it was, anyway, so what I have here is a slideshow. I won't go into too much of the story because it's all in the book, but this slideshow has pictures of crime scene pictures from the Monster of Florence, pictures of Mario and I investigating and so forth. And I'll tell you a little bit about, so that's me when we moved to Florence in the year 2000, when I was much younger. And that's the Arno River, and that's the Ponte Vecchio behind. And that's Mario Spezi, the fellow I had. So anyway, after he told me the story of the Monster of Florence, I was I thought, this is, someone's got to write this up in English. This has got to be written. So I gave up my novel, which never got written. And I said to Mario, let's write a story for the New Yorker about this. Now, even though he didn't write in English or speak English, he could write in Italian and I could translate into English. And my Italian got much better very quickly living in Italy and doing immersive language training and trying to talk to the teachers of our kids in school, never understanding, trying to figure out what they were saying about how much our kids were misbehaving in school. My 5-year-old son, they were with the nuns, right? And so the head nun, the direttrice, very scary woman, I'm telling you, called us into her office and she was telling us that our son was a Monello. Lui è un Monello. And we were like, grazie, suore. She said, no grazie, no, Monello. So we went home and looked up the word Monello, and it means rascal. Anyway, all right. So this is Mario Spezi. And here we are at the scene of one of these murders. You can see their crosses in the background of the two people who were killed. I was Pia Rontini, and I have some pictures of them here. And this is outside of Florence. Now, in Italy, most kids live with their parents until they're married. And most don't get married until they're in their 30s. The people marry in Italy late. So having sex in parked cars is a national pastime, especially in Florence. I had someone tell me 2/3 of all Florentines were conceived in the back of a car. So the monster would wait in these places where people would park to make love. He would wait there like a spider, waiting for them to come. He would wait for the moment when they were most distracted and unaware of their surroundings, and then he would kill them, shoot the man first, shoot the woman, drag the woman out, and perform this really horrific mutilation. And he would then, on a couple of occasions, mail body parts to the police to mock them and tease them, to sort of ridicule them because they couldn't catch him. And the police were desperate to solve this case, and he always killed only on a Saturday night in the summertime with no moon. He was very much in control of what he did. That's different from some serial killers who are not in control. He was in control. And he would wait. He'd commit, this horrific double murder, and then he'd wait. And the police would finally arrest somebody for the murder, and then he would kill again, just to force them to release that person. And then the police would arrest someone else for the murder, and then he'd kill again. And he did this for 11 years. And the police, this is what I mean by investigating 100,000 men. I mean, it's unbelievable the size of the investigation and the desperation of it. Mario Spezi and I, this was at the scene of one of the first killings in 1981. This is a gorgeous olive grove. There are views of Florence in the distance. There are castles dotting the hills. The contrast between the scenes of the murders and between the murders themselves and the beauty of these scenes where people would come to make love is really quite startling. And so we started working on this case and together. All right, here are some of the crime scene photos. This is, well, I don't really need to go into too much detail, but that's the Carabinieri officer, and he shot through the window. And here's the strange thing, and this is what makes this case so strange, is that this murder occurred in 1981, and when Mario was covering the newspaper as the correspondent, and they were examining the shells left by the killer from his gun, which was a .22 Beretta, and the firing pin on this gun had a defect in it that left an unmistakable mark on the shell that was like a fingerprint. So anyway, so they they collected the shells. He left them there at the site. And at a certain point, the police got an anonymous note saying, look at this killing. And it had a clipping in it of a killing that would have occurred in 1978. 1968. That was, this is 81. So they went back and they found that the evidence file from that killing had not been thrown away, and they had the shells in there, and they looked at these shells, and they were not only the same defective firing pin on these shells, but the casings came from the same box of bullets. Okay, so fired with the same gun, the same box of bullets in 1968. But the person who committed that murder was in prison. He had confessed to it, and he really probably had done it. He was in prison in 1981. And then they looked back and they found another killing that had been done in 1974 using the same gun, the same box of bullets, and the same thing, a couple killed in a car who were making love. And again, this person who committed the 1968 killing was in prison in 1974. So the question was, who did he give the gun to? And he refused to say. He never said. Anyway, it's an interesting case. That's another crime scene photograph from that particular killing. And this is the Pierantini killing. That's Mario Spezi, the journalist covering this. This was in 1981. These are just crime scene photographs that just show you what, and these are the young couple that was killed from those crime scene pictures you saw before. Her mother was a Danish and her father was Italian, and he's Italian. And the father, it ruined the parents' lives. The father became obsessed with this, finding the killer, and he would go down to the police station every week and harangue them, and why can't you find the killer, and so forth. And finally he dropped dead in the police station of a heart attack. And now Mario and I interviewed the mother. Oh, here's another crime scene. This was the last one of the monster that we know of. In 1985, it was a French couple who were camped in a little turnout in Chianti, in this beautiful little area where people would sort of camp surreptitiously. And it was a horrific killing, and they were able to reconstruct it. I won't go into the details. It's just really disturbing. Another crime scene picture. They're putting a body in one of these plastic evidence boxes. And that's that same killing. This is a color photograph of, they were camped in a tent, and the monster killed them both and chased one of them. And the guy was an Olympic runner, and he chased him down and cut his throat. So the monster was a very physically adept person. Now, as I mentioned, the monster teased the police. He mocked them, and he sent a body part to the police in this envelope to Dottoressa della Monica Silvia della Monica, who's one of the prosecutors in the case, like investigators, because in Italy the prosecutors also do investigation. Here in the U.S., that prosecutors don't normally investigate. They take the investigation from the FBI or the police and prosecute it. In Italy, they actually investigate, and that's a problem because they're not really trained to investigate. We have a much better system. But anyway, she got this body part that was mailed using these cutout letters, and it was so upsetting to her that she quit. She quit the case. She was so disturbed. And they had during the time of the monster killings, the city of Florence was in terror, and someone saw somebody speeding from but it seemed like they were speeding from one of the murder scenes, and so they did this identikit portrait of this person, and they issued this, when this portrait came out, it caused absolute consternation in Florence. Hundreds of people condemned and reported their neighbors, their doctors, their lawyers, the butcher, the local butcher, as being this guy. And it overwhelmed the police. They were completely paralyzed. And several people who were accused of being the Monster of Florence actually committed suicide because it became so just terrible for them to be accused of this. There it is. It was counterproductive to release this portrait. And here's some of the people that were arrested. And they all most of them in the early days were immigrants to Italy from Sardinia. The immigrants, Sardinia is part of Italy, but they speak a different language, and they were considered to be sort of foreigners by the Italians on the mainland. And there was a group in the 60s. Sardinia was a very poor country that emigrated from Sardinia to Italy, and they got involved in crime. They were gangsters, basically. And so this one family of gangsters came under suspicion. And here's one of them. And here's one of the people who were arrested and then released. And then he was arrested again and put on trial and accused of being a member of a group of people who were the Monster of Florence, killing as a group of friends. And he was mentally deficient and unable to. It's a crazy story. This guy is a member of that Sardinian group, and Mario and I think that in the 1968 murder, where that gun was used, that had and they found the guy who did it. I mean, they actually gave him a paraffin glove test and found that he just fired a gun, and he confessed to the murder and so on and so forth. He was in prison. They think that he gave the gun to this guy, who is a member of his Sardinian clan, and that 1968 killing was done by a group of people, one of whom enjoyed it so much that he then went on to become the Monster of Florence. And it couldn't be him because he was actually in prison during some of the monster killings. But Mario and I believe, this was Mario's investigation, that his son stole the gun from him and became the Monster of Florence, the gun and the box of bullets. That's his brother, who was also arrested as being the Monster of Florence and then had to be released when the monster killed again. Another guy who was arrested as being the monster, who and yet another guy arrested for being the Monster of Florence. That's the third brother of those Sardinians. And so the interesting thing about this case was that when we moved to Italy, we rented this villa just outside of Italy, and outside of Florence. And one of the things that Mario said in our meeting was, "Oh, that villa that you rented has three interesting landmarks around it. One is the via, is the castle where Amerigo Vespucci grew up. We live in America. He was a map maker. Americus was his Latin name, and he was the one who made the map of America. That then he signed it, and then his name inadvertently became attached to it. And that's that villa right there. And we lived right down here, and that was where the monster committed one of his double homicides of a couple making love in a VW van that had parked in this olive grove. But it turned out it was a homosexual couple, one of whom had this long blonde hair. So the monster, looking through the window, thought it was a heterosexual couple, killed them by shooting through the side of the van, and went in. And when he discovered that they were not a man and a woman, he became enraged and trashed the place, ripped up all their pornographic magazines, and left without mutilating them. Anyway, that was a very strange episode. And so this was this murder had taken place right outside the villa that we'd rented. And I said to Mario, it's funny, the real estate agent never told us about that. So anyway, it became a huge thing in Florence. Here's a comic strip that was made out of the Monster of Florence, and they posted signs all over Florence, "Occhio ragazzi," or in English, "Watch out, kids, you could be attacked." And they were trying to stop people from parking in these remote areas around the city. And it worked. And what happened was that you've probably all been to anyone who's been to Florence has been to the Piazza della Signoria, which is the main square. Well, during this time, that square was full of cars with newspaper plastered on the windows and people inside having sex because they were terrified to do this outside of the city. This is the mother and father of Pia Rontini and Claudio Stefanacci, who were murdered. He died. He was the one who died of a heart attack in the police station, and we interviewed her. Mario and I interviewed her, and it was, I'm a journalist, right? I'm supposed to be tough, but I found myself when I was interviewing her starting to leak tears. It was just so terrifying, to lose a daughter like that, and it just ruined her life. I mean, completely ruined her life. It's just something you can't recover from. This is Thomas Harris, who wrote The Silence of the Lambs. Now, it turns out that Thomas Harris was fascinated with this case, and he actually attended the trial of several of the people who were accused of being the Monster of Florence, and this is him at the trial, taking notes. And Hannibal, his book, The Silence of the Lambs, and then his book, Hannibal, were based on the Monster of Florence and what he learned. And so everybody in Florence was wearing these T-shirts. I love Pacciani, and it was a big deal in Florence in the 1980s. Okay, in 1968, the man and the woman who were murdered in their car while they were making love had a little boy in the back seat, and that's him. And that's a photograph of him taken in the police station in 1968. And the police kept asking, "What did you see? What did you see?" So Mario and I interviewed him. And here he is, older. So we interviewed him, and he said he wanted, for the interview, he had to be paid 250,000 lira, which was not that much money, like $500 or something. But and before he talked to us, so I gave him the money, and then we said, "Now, what can you tell us about that night?" And he said, "That's what they keep asking me. They've been asking me that for 20 years." He said, "All I remember from that night is seeing my mother's dead body, and that's the only memory I have of my mother, the only one." He said, "So stop asking me that question." So anyway, and that's the lady that we interviewed, Pia Rontini's mother. Now, Mario believes that he was able to identify the person who was the Monster of Florence, who is the son of that man that I showed you the earlier picture of, who stole the gun from his father. And this is him, Antonio Vinci. And we went to interview him. It's in the book. It is the most frightening interview I've ever conducted as a journalist. It was very disturbing. And at the end of the interview, Mario asked him, "Are you the Monster of Florence?" And he gave an answer which I can't repeat. It's too horrible to repeat with the camera on. But you have to read the book to find out what he said. And then, so when I arrived in the year 2000, the monster investigation had become this huge, sprawling investigation run by this guy, Michele Giuttari. And he's from Sicily. He was the chief inspector of the monster case in Florence, in that whole region. And he had a new theory, that this was not a lone serial killer, but that this was a satanic sect that had been operating since the Middle Ages of important people, doctors, lawyers, journalists, noblemen, who were killing these women and mutilating them and taking away body parts from them to use as the blasphemous wafer in their black masses. Now, does that sound like a good theory to you? No. I mean, it was nuts. It was crazy. It's a crazy
Reading
theory.
Dan Brown.
Yeah. For sure. See, that's the problem. These cops have been reading too many books, like the ones I write. And this was the prosecutor, Giuliano Mignini, who is the same prosecutor in the Amanda Knox case. And this is a crazy woman named Gabriella Carlizzi, who was a very religious woman who had visions of Jesus coming down to her and telling her the answers to all these, who did these murders, how they were done, and so on and so forth. And this Giuliano Mignini interviewed her and took down all that she said and seemed to have believed it. She was the one who said it was a satanic sect. It's the Order of the Rose. It goes back to the Middle Ages, and all these people are involved, including Mario Spezi and Douglas Preston. And this is a doorstop that was found at one of the murder sites, which they claimed was a satanic object. So, as a journalist, Mario and I, investigating the Monster of Florence, fell into our own story, and we came under suspicion by the police in Italy, and that we were involved in obstructing their investigation. And they bugged his car, and they bugged our cell phones. Mario kept telling me our cell phones are being bugged. I said, no, they're not. No way, no way. Get out. I thought it was paranoia until they came and arrested me and arrested Mario. They accused him of being the Monster of Florence, and they accused me. They brought me in for an interrogation in Italian. That guy Mignini and 5 cops interrogated me in Italian, no lawyer present and no translator. By this time, my Italian was pretty good. But and they accused me of being an accessory after the fact to knowing about Mario Spezi being a member of the satanic sect that committed these murders. And then they expelled me from Italy. They charged me with a bunch of felonies, obstruction of justice, a felony in Italy that's known as reticenza, which is reticence, which is basically not telling what you know. And that is a very serious felony in Italy. And you can't plead the Fifth Amendment in Italy and say, against self-incrimination. So anyway, so I was expelled from Italy. Mario was arrested. He was brutalized in prison, treated horribly. He was treated as a terrorist, denied access to a lawyer, locked up in a freezing cell with no clothes. And the worst thing they did to him was they took away his cigarettes. And then this is a story in the Boston Globe about how I was found, myself in this situation. I had to hire a lawyer in Italy and spend thousands and thousands of euros, on trying to solve my legal problems there, my criminal, indictments. And here's a story in the Corriere della Sera, which is the main newspaper in Italy. It's like the New York Times, about me and Mario and all the accusations against us. Well, Mario was released from prison after 6 weeks of brutal treatment. I raised hell in the United States and in Italy. The Committee to Protect Journalists got involved. PEN International got involved. And the Italians finally released him and dropped all the charges against him and me. And anyway, so that's the story. The book was sold into many languages. Here, this is the British version, the Spanish version, American, French, Polish, Dutch. But anyway, it was a huge bestseller all over the world. And that's why Netflix was so interested in it and why they stole my book. So anyway, that's the story of the Monster of Florence.
Do you know, I think your theory that if a guy would not talk about who he gave the gun to, that it probably was a family member or a clan member is a sound one.
Yes,
Is
that's
anybody
right.
else cold? I see where I'm going to turn the, pardon me, air conditioning back up.
Anyway, so my agent, my Hollywood agent, said that maybe all is not lost, and is going to show the book around later this month to make for them to make a movie out of it. And so, but it'll be interesting. I mean, I urge you all to see the Monster of Florence show, and I have to see it myself. It might be good. It might not be good. I just don't know. So. It's on Netflix, and it was the #1 streaming show on Netflix for a while, but then it dropped very quickly. And of course, everyone I know says, "Oh, it's a terrible show. It's awful. Don't watch," because they know that I'm mad. So, but it might not be bad. It might be good. Who knows? So.
Right. It's really interesting that a book that published so long ago has sprung back into prominence. And, storytelling, visual storytelling, film or television is, what's the word I want? It can breathe life into a book in a way that gets lots of people think they've then read the book. I've often thought that was true about The Thin Man. We once did a program down at the down in downtown Phoenix at the Orpheum about Dashiell Hammett and The Thin Man, and I asked the audience how many people had actually read the book, or had they all just seen the Humphrey Bogart movie, and it was like only like 10% of people had read the book. So sometimes the film version is the thing that really carries that story for people.
Yeah, and it's a little unfortunate because Hollywood. I mean, Apple doing this series about my book, which by the way they killed it when the Netflix thing came out. But I read the scripts and they departed quite a bit from the story, and I kept objecting to that. I said, the story is it's a great story. What you don't need to dress it up. But I fear that maybe the Netflix series did the same thing. These Hollywood writers, they don't care about the truth. They just want to, write I don't know what they want. But anyway, they don't have a fidelity to telling the true story.
Do you think that if this crime, turn this on, yep, there wasn't a lot in the way of scientific investigation, forensics were not nearly as good as they are today. Do you think that the crime wasn't solved because they just didn't have the right tools, or do you think they just kept getting sidetracked?
Well, I think that it's both actually. I mean, Mario told me he was, at the scene of each of these crimes. He said that it was only the last crime of the monster that they actually put up a police perimeter and didn't allow people to walk in to the murder scene. He said it was incredible. He'd arrive as a journalist, and there are all these journalists over there, and they're picking up stuff and looking at things, and the police are milling around, and no one's stopping to, put up a crime scene perimeter. The Italians are really backward when it comes to forensic techniques. They are really good at interrogations, though, because they break the mafia by interrogating them, and that's tough. But as far as collecting fiber and DNA and all that stuff, they're not good at that.
So generally, serial killers, at least from the little bit I know about them, mostly from reading fiction, don't stop. Although the guy in Kansas, whatever his name was, was an example of somebody who did stop. So, do you think the guy died? Why did he quit in 1985?
Well, that's a really good question because at a certain point, the Italians were so flummoxed that they secretly hired the American FBI to the behavioral science unit of the FBI to prepare a psychological profile of the monster, which they did. And and I've seen that, I read that secret report. And the FBI reported that this type of serial killer is in control, that this type of serial killer is not driven to do this, that this type of serial killer does it because he wants to. It gives him pleasure. He likes it. And so it's said that he had issues with abandonment. Now, he'd probably been abandoned by his mother at a young age, and had severe trauma as a young boy, which manifested itself later. And it said that he could stop killing if he met an older woman and they became partners, and she would become a mother figure to him. So right after the 1985 killing, Antonio Vinci met an older woman and moved in, and she moved in. Now, his life story is one of complete horror. He witnessed his father murdering his mother when he was a little boy. His father then, who is that man that I owned the gun, then involved him in these, when he was a little boy, in sexual parties with all kinds of deviant sex going on. I mean, and he was just a kid, you know. It was just horrible. And the FBI report said that he probably was impotent and unable to possess a woman, and that's why he killed them and took away their body parts. That's how he possessed a woman, you know, in his sick mind.
So if they knew all that, they just didn't have enough evidence to convict him?
Well, the thing was that the Italian police got this report, and they read it and they didn't believe any of it. They said, "Oh, this is not true. Italian serial killers must be different," and they deep sixed the report. They hid it, and Mario, who being the great journalist he was, found it and was able to bring it out to light. But the police said, "Oh, that report is totally irrelevant because it's only about American serial killers. It has nothing to do with Italian serial killers." But Mario took that FBI report, and that's how he identified Antonio Vinci, because there are all kinds of very specific traits listed there about where he would kill, when he would kill, who he would kill, why he was killing, and so forth. And Mario was able to put all that together and identify that guy. And he even found the police report that indicated that guy had stolen his father's gun, had broken into his house and stolen something, but the father refused to say what it was he had stolen. But Mario thinks it must have been the gun.
So is this guy still alive?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, there's no limit on, I mean, no, you know, time doesn't run out on a murder investigation, but...
Well, the police, what happened was I wrote a story for The Atlantic about this killing, and I disguised that guy's name and tried to disguise who he was, because, you know, you can't just go and accuse somebody of being a serial killer who's, you know, an innocent or just a citizen, you know. You can't do that as a journalist. So I really tried to disguise his identity in that newspaper, in that magazine article, and it only took 24 hours for the damned Italian journalist to figure out who it was. And so the police then went to him, Antonio Vinci, and said, "There's this American journalist and this Italian journalist who've accused you of being the Monster of Florence. We want you to participate, to work with us to bring criminal charges against them for false, you know, accusation." And he said, you know, he basically said to go F themselves, that he would never cooperate with the police for any reason whatsoever. And he seemed quite pleased by the idea that he'd been identified as the Monster of Florence. And later, if you know the show 48 Hours, Stone Phillips went to him and asked him, "Are you the Monster of Florence?" And now he wouldn't let Phillips film this interview, and he wouldn't let Phillips even... It was off the record, but Phillips told me about it. But his response was so terrifying, oh my God, and so brutal that, again, I can't really repeat it, and that's not even in the book. But it just makes me think that this guy really is. And he knew all this stuff about the killings. When we interviewed him, he knew everything there was to know about the killings. And he knew stuff that Mario said had never been in the papers. And in fact, I'll tell you this story. When we went to interview him, Mario said, I don't want to interview him because I live in his territory. And I said, look, we're journalists. We have to do this. So we went at 7:45 at night to his apartment when we knew he'd be there. We couldn't, call ahead of time. We were just going to show up and try to surprise him, and we did. But Mario used a fake name. So when we pressed the buzzer, I used my real name because that's journalistic ethics. You can't use a fake name, right? Well, he said he wasn't going to use his real name because he was terrified. So he used a different name. And so this guy buzzed us right up. And we came into his apartment, and he took one look at Spezi and he said, wait, you, I must have misheard your name. You're Mario Spezi. You're the guy who wrote all those articles about the Monster of Florence. I've read everything you've written. And it was like, okay, here we go.
So the case is not solved and probably never will be.
It'll never be solved. And the interesting thing is, I wonder if this show on Netflix, which is the first season is over, it's like a 4-part series, but they're going into another season. If they're going to, what story they're going to tell, because, are they going to, because our book really contains the real story. The police version of this is completely wrong. It's, satanic sect and all this stuff. It's ridiculous. And I just wonder which version they're going to go with. They haven't gotten there yet, apparently. They've just started with the murders. And so exactly who did it or why or whatever, I really have to see it to talk about it.
Well, if it's television, satanic sex will probably play better than, this guy.
Well, it certainly played better with the Italians. They love, oh my God, the Italian public just loved. When I was in Italy, all these articles about the secret satanic group that had done the monster killings, and they were investigating noblemen, and they were investigating doctors and journalists, of which Mario Spezi was the most important. And there was a doctor was found drowned in Lake Trasimeno, who was a very, very distinguished, he was a young guy, but he was a very important gastroenterologist in Perugia, and came from a very wealthy family, and they said, he was a member of the Monster of Florence cult, and they killed him because he was about to reveal their secrets. So when I was in Italy, they exhumed his body because that guy Mignini claimed that they had buried him, and then the monster sect had dug up his body to take it away and put another body in there, because for some reason, I can't remember their reasoning. And so they dug up his body, but they found it was really his body. So then Mignini said, they must have switched the bodies again and reburied them. I mean, it's just insane.
Well, let's move on to actual true crime stories that might have been solved. Why? Oh, sure.
Yeah, I guess after all this time, there's a lot of evidence apparently that was collected. No DNA was ever taken off of any of the information. There was no familial match that they ever tried to do.
That's really, really a good question. They did take DNA samples. Well, at the time they didn't, because they didn't have DNA, but they have things that, evidence from the murder scenes of blood and so on and so forth that they could test for DNA. They haven't done that. Why aren't they? I don't know. Because it would humiliate them finding out it was a lone serial killer after all, which all the evidence points to a lone serial killer. Bodies were dragged. They weren't carried. I mean, there are 1,000 little details that indicate one person did these crimes.
Okay. Maybe at some point somebody will actually, maybe when the people who botched up the investigation are no longer around to protest, somebody will actually do this.
You're probably right about that.
But they have to have something from the guy that you think is guilty to compare it to.
Yeah, or they could do like the 23andMe sort of, family thing, as you said. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah. No, I think he was full of regret. I think he felt that the sacrifice to his family, to his wife, was too great. And also to him. I mean, he had, this is really not in the book, but he had really severe psychological problems following this case that were really difficult for him. And he had to have a lot of psychological counseling because he had PTSD from and I mean, I could see how he could, but just interviewing the mother of one of those victims, I mean, if I did that for years and we're following this case, I'd have PTSD. I realized I could never report again on a true crime serial killer case ever. It's too much. I couldn't do it.
So you agreed to edit the best true crime stories of 2025. So can you give us just a little clue about what the different stories in here might be? Are they all wildly different, or
well,
do you need the book to look at? It's been a while.
It's a really interesting.
You always have to remember
yeah.
that the author is a long way away from the book and
doesn't
always remember.
It was years since I read these, but I also worked. Peter Crooks did a lot of the initial editing, so what I did was not as important as what he did. But I also wrote a foreword to this, where I really looked at why do people like dark stories? I mean, why are the great works of literature, not about nice things? Like Dante's Divine Comedy. We read the Inferno. Oh my God, talk about a dark story. But how many people read the Paradiso? I mean, it's boring. It's all about these souls circulating, in heaven, happy and lovely, and no one wants to read about that. So I really tried to take a very deep anthropological, even evolutionary biological look at why we human beings are attracted to dark stories. But the interesting thing about this book is that it is such a great variety of true crime. It is the definition of true crime is very broad in this book. For example, let's see. There's the heiress at Harvard who helped revolutionize murder investigations and the case she couldn't forget. I mean, that's a really interesting story because it goes beyond just, a true crime story to talk about something a lot deeper. The Forever Cure is really good. There are a lot of really good stories in here that are by excellent journalists. And some of them are quite funny. Or not funny, but they're not completely dark and horrifying. They're sort of a glimpse into the sort of ridiculous side of human nature. So, like, nudists fight off pirate terrorist. Yeah.
So there's a variety of stories in there, right?
A great variety.
And in podcasting, true crime is a huge thing. True crime podcasts, and they have actually now become podcasters. Have become regular investigators in crime fiction. It used to be that they were always like private eyes, but now private eyes are mostly doing boring digital stuff. Gumshoe is not a word that really works anymore for private eyes, and so a number of authors have used podcasters to conduct their investigations. John Sanford's last book, Lethal Prey, actually had a group of podcasters who descended upon the crime scene, and Virgil and Lucas had to work around them and then eventually worked with them to solve the crime, which I thought was a fascinating thing. In regard to your comment about why do we read dark stories, 1995, P.D. James made her only appearance here. She didn't travel very often, and we were hosting Left Coast Crime, which is a convention, and it was P.D. James and Tony Hilliman and Robert Parker, and I'm missing somebody, were our guests of honor. It was I've never done one since because I thought there was no way we could ever possibly equal that lineup. But somebody asked her why she wrote such dark stories and why she was fascinated with that. She's called a cozy writer in Britain, which I think is hilarious. But when they say cozy, they mean traditional. They don't mean, cute. And she said, and her answer has always stayed with me, she said, How comforting to lie in your warm bed and know that the footstep you hear on the stairs is not coming for you. I thought that that was as good a description of why we read those
Yeah.
things as, in a way it makes us feel safer in our own lives,
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, I that's true. What a
Anybody
poetic-
have any other questions? We don't want to keep you too long, and we know you want to get your book signed.
Well, I didn't really share a lot of this with my wife. I mean, because we were living in the monsters territory, and we had kids, little kids, and so I didn't really go in. And it's funny because Mario was also keeping a lot of the details from his wife as well. Not that she couldn't take it or somehow she's delicate, but it seemed like something not really worth talking about. I mean, the villa that we rented, it's like, a house, was a damn fortress. And I wondered why, it wasn't just outside the house, but also the door leading into the bedrooms was like something that you couldn't batter down with a battering ram. And I wondered, and it was not old either. And I wondered why. And then when I discovered this about the monster, I realized, okay, well, they fortified this house because they were worried.
Yeah, but if he was only out there cruising around looking for people in parked cars, I'm not sure why the house needed to be.
I know. I mean, a good point. But
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Yeah. Jim, do you have a question?
Did they ever try to set up decoys in parked cars to try to?
Yes, they did. They did that. They put wigs on men, two men, and they'd park them in a car. I mean, a wig on one man, and they'd park in a car. But the monster was never fooled. He was only fooled once by the two gay men. Yeah, they did that. They did quite a bit of that.
So, does anybody up front tell me how many numbers we gave out? Thank you. All right, so we have 3 things we can give away here.
Okay.
So if you would pick a number between 1 and 20, one person will get a copy of Pendergast: The Beginning.
Well, I think I'll pick number 1 because that person was here first.
Yay! I think that's very kind,
Yeah.
right?
All
Could
right.
I get you to pass that book back to her? And then we have a copy of the best true crime stories, so you can pick a number that's not number 1.
Okay, well, I'll pick number 16.
16, are you here? Way back there. All right, I'll find you. And then finally, we have one more Pendergast to give away.
Wow, that's tough. All right, another number. Number 19.
19 here? It's you, sir. Okay. I will find you both afterward. So thank you all very much for coming. Let's give Doug a round of applause.
Thank you.
And if Doug will move his laptop out of the way, I think it'll be easier if he just stays here. And if you will line up by number, and then if anybody is left over, so to speak, that would like to do something, you can do that. Thank you very much. And I have this. It's wonderful, isn't it? Look at our own. Thank you. I love it.